Hello and welcome to episode 21 of the Deadbeat Philosophy Podcast. I'm Dave Baumeister. It's good to have you here. If this is your first time watching, welcome. If you've been here for a previous episode, welcome back. Today, like the previous episode, we're going to do something a little bit different in that rather than interviewing a guest, I'm going to share with you some of my recent philosophical writing. The work I'm going to share with you today is titled On the Conthropocene. This grows out of my previous research on the German Enlightenment philosopher Immanuel Kant, whereas my previous engagements with Kant have been more or less scholarly engagements with his work and unpacking concepts within and swimming within his system of thought. The goal of this new project is to bring Kant's thought in connection with the Anthropocene and the modern-day global environmental crisis, rather than a somewhat traditional approach to a historical figure whereby we take the established theory or philosophy of the historical figure and then apply it to the contemporary problem. I'm going to reverse the direction of that gesture. So I'm not applying Kant to the problem, I'm applying the problem to Kant. My central thesis is that Kant's philosophy has relevance for the present, and by examining and studying it, we can learn about the paradoxes and the tensions that underlie our own world and social fabric that are relevant to this environmental crisis and the problems within it. Thanks for listening today. Let's dive right in. Chapter 1, The Story of the Conthropocene. Perhaps a kind of fairy tale could be written on the basis of Kantian philosophy, with other forms of intuition, and where light becomes magic. It's from Georg Christoph Lichtenberg, Section 2, Jack and the Beanstalk of Reason. Meet Jack. Jack traded the family cow for magic beans of reason. Foolish Jack, it appears to his mother, embodiment of his genesis and rootedness in nature. From nature's vantage, Jack ought to remain ground-bound. His natural posture is quadrupedal, like the ass, pacing the fields, carrying his naturally endowed burden. But it is they who find him foolish who are the real fools. They will be left in the dust. For these beans sprout beanstalks of reason. These stalks reach higher than the eye can see. Although themselves natural in raw substance, green and leafy, they are rational in form, reason in them being what makes them magic, the only real magic in the world. They are perfectly and possibly vertical. They require no pre-extant rock or trunk or fence to lean themselves upon. These vines wind only upon themselves, beacons of independence in an otherwise wholly dependent agrarian ecosystem landscape. The beanstalks reach so far up that one cannot from the ground fathom their true end. Up there in the sky above the clouds, that cloudy heavens up there where the rational beanstalks reach is so far above the world of common natural sense down here that it has its own weather. It is noumenal, or as close to the noumenal as an earthling like Jack, his arms straining at the sheer labor of climbing so high, can achieve. A space of ghosts and shadows. The climb is dizzying, a disorienting vertigo, shattering one's sense of scale and belonging. But once one arrives above the clouds, any fear of heights dissipates. One has something solid beneath one's feet, not dirty natural ground, but what's even more solid, the foundation that properly critical, properly transcendental reason provides. With that rational, magical journey above the clouds, one has passed through heaven's gate, and the kingdom of ends awaits you. Like Prometheus, or that modern Prometheus, Benjamin Franklin, Jack seeks to steal something and succeeds. Fire, electricity, and the goose that lays the golden eggs. Similar prizes, delivered in capture, irreversibly, back into the realm of human beings, literally enriching them without end and with little additional cost, the cost mostly sunk, indeed externalized, into the risky business of their plunder in the first place. And as countless spice or fur or tobacco or slave galleons launched from the 15th century onward illustrated in their time, risky business can reap enormous, incalculable profit. Here the cargo is of a worth beyond price itself, the golden eggs being vessels of a certain reason-dipped version of the golden rule. So act that you use humanity, in your own person as well as in the person of the other, always at the same time as end and never merely as means. from Kant's groundwork for the metaphysics of morals. And while the magical heist is underway, the giant, whose massive mansion has been up there all along, can fume and chase and spit venom and shout his fee-fi-fo-fum all he wants, all in vain. For Jack, Odyssean in his cunning, has thought of his escape, invents an escape plan as he goes along, remains always one step ahead. He has an axe, has felled trees with it before, and is prepared to fell god giants with it too, if need be. And having landed back in the natural phenomenal realm, panting with disheveled goose under his arm, Jack wastes no time finishing the job. Reason has made Jack a man, his rational manhood ascertained and secured in the very acts of high climbing and spontaneous thievery. One small step for Jack, one giant leap for Jack kind. The giant has been bested in his own home, and God must now live within merely rational bounds. God demoted to a principle of reason. And though the magic of the beans of reason still exceeds him, after all, Jack did not create the beans himself. The planting, cultivating, and harvesting of beans he takes as his prerogative, as practically oriented, rational human being. And of the beanstalk itself, its purpose served as flesh ladder and throbbing green escape buggy, this beanstalk can now be felled, though the magic reason that made it grow will not perish with it. There are always more beanstalks to be grown, and besides, with the golden goose stowed safely in a cage in the cottage, there's no need to go anywhere else anymore. Reason can rule sovereign perfectly well down here. Golden eggs have the power to buy anything, everything having its price. And so the beanstalk falls with the last blow of Jack's axe, the god giant fast in his rage, but not fast enough, plummets to earth, never to occupy the throne on high, never to possess the golden goose and its golden eggs again. And the beanstalk itself has been put in its rightful place too. When it dies, it is chopped into small, consumable pieces and burned or eaten or fed to livestock, or, if not, then buried in the ground, later to be used again as compost. Everything has its place in this new kingdom on earth, the kingdom of rational human ends. A new king reigns now, with Jack and the whole society of Jacks reigning in and through this reigning, as vassals of magically vertical, magically valuable, magically pure reason. Section 3. I know you might think this is actually Section 2 since we've only had one section before, but I left out the real Section 1, which is the foreword, which sounded very strange when it was read like this. So if you'd like to look at that, you're welcome to go look at it on the website. Section 3, with all due respect to cephalopods. There are countless routes one might pursue to ground the Anthropocene, or the geosocietal modern human era, in the intellectual history of past centuries. Like all social or collective undertakings, the Anthropocene is naturally connected to, and to some extent embedded within, this history. We aim to address a tentacle of the Anthropocene that has been insufficiently and not yet directly enough addressed. Were we able to take this tentacle we mean and cut it in cross-section, like slabs out of marble or tree, two of the most historically important carvable materials on Earth, there would be, in this tentacle, many smaller interwoven strands of many colors, textures, and trajectories. One of these strands reflects the thought of Immanuel Kant. Hence, we call this tentacle the Conthropocene, even though the tentacle entire is made up of much else besides Kant's thought and its resonance in our world today. Our singling out one strand to name the entire tentacle reflects the proportionally higher intensity of this strand relative to others, the intensity of its resonance across time and into the present. The Kantian strand is so thick and appears to be so continuously present across the length of the tentacle that the integrity of the entire unfurling limb seems to somehow depend upon it. The Conthropocene is one tentacle of the Anthropocene among others. Each of the tentacles unfurl themselves over time in concert, operating according to a certain organized logic, but each also has a mind of its own. There are many, many tentacles in all, probably more than 8, this being a unique octopus. This particular tentacle we have been describing, the Conthropocene tentacle, which provides the object of analysis across the pages to follow, is especially elastic. It moves in a distinctively erratic way. It is very helpful to the other tentacles. It aids each of them in accomplishing their work of manipulating and extracting edible materials from the reef or seabed it is presently hovering above, fattening itself by minute amounts all the time. The other tentacles gladly accept this help. The Conthropocene supplies them with some nutrient or enzyme they seem unable to self-produce. This nutrient or enzyme is the ability to carry on as if it both is and is not part of the reef ecosystem. The tentacles achieve their concert through this paradox. 4. The Conthropocene is. The Conthropocene is the manifestation in today's conceptual, ideological, and institutional landscape of the Kantian paradox of humans' relation to nature. The Conthropocene is the paradox of pure extranatural reason, coded as locus of personhood, freedom, and individual identity, but also all the while maintaining, though on the horizon, the aim of becoming nature once again, the idea that the human is nothing other than natural. The Conthropocene is the fusion of rationality, humanity, and personality with extranatural reason, the linchpin. This is the machine of both our content and our discontent. It is both and all the way down. Its vehicles are the notions of personhood, self-legislation and creation, freedom, agency, objectivity, all of which are tied to a paradoxical vision of the human as both natural and extranatural. Its basic move is to align personhood, freedom, etc. with the human species, with the human as part of nature, inconsistently and impossibly, but in a way convenient for certain human interests, the interest reflected in the Anthropocene. The Conthropocene names a certain arrangement of human subjectivity in the modern era, one whose reach extends far beyond human society, to touch the entire planet and to touch, in its own eyes, all the planets and spaces that lie beyond. Put differently, what is the Conthropocene? It is the very air that that many of us, breathe, that through which we swim as we lead our all too human, all too paradoxical lives. Rooted in the world of Kant, but with a life of its own and a tentacle-like mind of its own. This is not a matter of Kant's influence per se, nor of the ability of one human to represent an entire era inhabited by billions of people and trillions of life forms. We mean by the term to name and so bring to examination an aspect of the Anthropocene that has not been named or examined before, but which deserves to be. On the Conthropocene 5, the global environmental crisis. By naming and bringing to examination the Conthropocene, we aim to submit to philosophical critique a whole raft of issues that connect Kantian thought with the present-day global environmental crisis. Our use of quotation marks, not just for global environmental crisis, but for any crisis worthy of the name, reflects an attempt to leave undecided whether these crises are in fact crises. Crises are slippery electric eel-like things or events, or rather, both at the same time. Crises refuse to be pinned down both in terms of any immediate forthcoming solution or effective response, and in terms of a satisfying understanding or analysis. We realize this can become tiresome to the reader, or the listener, or the viewer. But we have opted to swap, in this instance, which we hope may be compensated for elsewhere, the reader's comfort and patience for what we hold to be a necessary theoretical deceit, necessary for the tonal coherence of the resonance-based approach of this project as a whole. That paradoxical elements operative in our world today ought, insofar as this is possible, be draped in paradoxicality when we encounter them. Placing this crisis in quotation marks is just one way that this kind of shrink-wrapped setting apart might be done in writing. Any deviation from ordinary language, which includes also ordinary academic language, carries the risk of being off-putting or inaccessible to readers, viewers, or listeners, especially those who prefer plain old, simple, commonsensical, clear-headed, everyday, ordinary speech in all things. But to speak only in the ordinary way carries its own risks. It carries the risk, we might say, if we are willing to allow a fairly straightforward expressivist relationship between thought and words, that one's words might not allow what one is thinking to come fully into thought. It may carry the risk that certain features of the world external to this particular ordinary language, for every human spoken and written language is a particular ordinary language, and whenever a particular language is adopted, certain features of the world are thought better with more ease than others. Particular languages afford and reflect the directionality being bipolar, particular ways of thinking about the world. But it may also carry the risk, perhaps the riskier risk, that certain features of the world internal to the language and all that it affords to be communicated in words by the human beings will, by leaving the logic of crisis unquestioned, be made unavailable to view. Especially unavailable, we think, would be those paradoxical features of the world that do crucial work in sustaining the unsustainable whole, but whose most effective working seems only possible when it is allowed to operate in the background and never in the foreground, a sort of Mephistopheles in the shadows. We hold that the second risk is riskier than the first, and so we are open to keeping this crisis in quotation, not so as to diminish it or approach it with denial, but to mark it out in its incredible meaning for us. Of course, there are many, many ways that this particular crisis can be thought and expressed in words. It would be better, perhaps, to call it rather the global environmental polycrisis, so as to mark its essential multifacetedness or multilayeredness, and the fact that many other present-day crises intersect with and co-constitute it, such as the cost of living crisis, the global financial crisis, the crisis of democracy, or the global migration crisis. But this risks losing focus of the environmental dimension we are interested to attend to here, which we hold is precisely the dimension of the Anthropocene and its particular determination of human nature. Apart from this structurally unclear relationship between crisis and language and the operative paradoxes of the world we inhabit, many other interesting questions about crises can be raised. Who determines when a crisis ought to count as a crisis? When exactly do things reach crisis levels or crisis level proportions? For us today, the midlife crisis is among the most discussed of all crises, it being a sort of universal, happens to the best of us kind of crisis. This is unlike crisis as a potentially get-throughable moment of danger, as in the Cuban Missile Crisis. What sort of crisis is the global environmental crisis? It seems to partake of both of these senses. It can be thought as something like human beings and the history of the Earth since the emergence of humans entering midlife, a stage of more or less demonstrated mastery, but also of self-doubt and more or less imminent death. But the global environmental crisis is also like the Cuban Missile Crisis, or at least we are led to believe that it may be like this. That the worst can, if we act fast, be averted, and that in future times, be it tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of years from now, human beings, or whichever kind of people are around then, can treat the whole matter as one for the history books. The conceptual history of crisis is also worthy of our attention. In English, the concept of crisis has medicinal roots, labeling the moment whereby, if an underlying serious developing illness is not effectively treated, that is, defeated, the slip towards imminent death could no longer be avoided. But one must ask, can it ever? It hangs on our scale of time and what counts as imminent. Crisis not as troublesome hindrance to get through or around, but as turning point, as moment where, while a good, we got through this resolution may be possible, a bad, we did not get through this failure to resolve is also possible. The global environmental crisis seems, in its presentation to us as crisis, to be a crisis in exactly this sense of axial point of turning. In the end, though, the business of defining the global environmental crisis being so thorny, so difficult to peel apart and get at, we prefer here to simply invite the reader to say, Okay, I know what you mean. Use the term global environmental crisis as a term of art, an element of the fairy tale presented in this text, and move on. We will return to the phenomena in question later on, if that is any consolation, and we entrust others whose hands are better trained at such matters than us to undertake the business of explaining what this thing, the global environmental crisis, actually is. Section 6, the Conthropocene and Us. We may not know who Immanuel Kant is, or might not care at all to learn about him and his philosophy, or might even find it incredibly implausible, even outright false, to propose any sort of connection between his philosophy and how we approach the question of human nature today, a question thrust back upon us by the global environmental crisis. Nevertheless, it is possible to understand all humans today as caught up in the Conthropocene's web of connection and impact. This becomes possible when it is shown how certain central features of Kant's thought are still central features of the social world we all inhabit. This does not mean, of course, that all of us are equal participants in the steering or composition of this world. The Conthropocene is as unjustly imbalanced in its proportionality of guilty and innocent as is the Anthropocene as a whole. Though the tides of global hegemony continue to shift, even on a conservative reckoning, it can be said that the Conthropocene looms large over most of the planet, roughly, though not exactly contiguous with the loom of global capitalism. And though the Conthropocene is not everywhere in operation, its operation currently plays a major role in how we human beings, especially through our governmental and supergovernmental attempts to manage the global environmental crisis, a domain where what is known by some as the sustainability paradox inevitably emerges, and accordingly where, we will explore later on, the Kantian paradox lies underneath at the root. And so, just as virtually everyone on the planet, including all human and non-human someones, are finding their lives in some way, to greater or lesser degrees, transformed by the Anthropocene as a whole, we can also confidently say that virtually everybody who is anybody is either a subject, a person, or a non-subject, a thing, in the grip of the Conthropocene. Section 7. Infanticidal hominins in the space of reasons. Imagine a string of hominins leading to Homo sapiens and reaching on back to our last common ancestors with chimpanzees. Now imagine that every 1,000 years along the string, starting with the first Ur-human, an individual living specimen is magically reanimated in the present. And here's the twist. In each instance, the species is determined to be responsible for the death of a Homo sapiens, a human being, one of us. Let's even say that the one who has died is a child Homo sapiens, for, at least when presented in this abstract way, a human child represents the kind of Homo sapiens whose death, from the vantage of the species as a whole, is taken to be most universally lamentable. Everybody seems to agree that, all things being equal, the death of a child is worse than the death of an adult. For the first few thousand or so hominin specimens, the fact that the creature was responsible for the death of the human child would be treated as tragic, horrible, unfortunate, or absurd, but not as immoral nor as evil. For this initial wave of hominins are, practically speaking, no different from lions, hippos, or crocodiles. These animals might sometimes kill human beings, even human children, but when they do, we cannot and do not blame the animal itself. It was merely acting out of its innate predatory instinct, we might say, or something like that. The animal is indeed deadly and perhaps should even be put down on account of this incident, but the real blame here lies with the parents of the child, or with whichever adult in charge allowed the child to come into such dangerous proximity to the beast. But then, at some point in the sequence, something would change. At some point, we would begin blaming the hominin themselves. At some point, as the hominins became more advanced, more intelligent, more like us, we would begin to think or feel that the blame, at least some of it, lies with the creature themselves, in precisely the way that we would say in the case of an infanticide committed by an adult human in a sound state of mind, that the blame really lies with them, and not with the parents or the other adults involved. At some point, the child's death would shift from being an accident to being an infanticide. The point at which we find the apish creature standing before us, not just technically responsible for the child's death in the way a crocodile or a lion would be, but also practically so, that is, morally responsible, or what is the same, as the outcome of freely made decisions. This we can label the precise point of the emergence of what philosophers have variously called reason, or free will, or responsibility, or self-consciousness in the evolutionary history of human beings. It is the line that separates humans from all other animals, while also separating any hominins before or tangential to Homo sapiens, who we might call practically, and not just technically, responsible for the child's death, as we might, presumably, in the case of Neanderthals, Homo erectus, or Homo habilis. This is the point where, morally, legally, socially, etc., they end and we begin. They end and we begin. At least this is how a certain dominant vision of the history, fate, and nature of human beings would approach the hominin sequence. This vision, let's call it ratiocentric humanism or anthropocentric rationalism, is rooted, among other places, in the influential, but still, I think, underread and underappreciated relative to its influence, philosophical anthropology of German Enlightenment philosopher Immanuel Kant. And this despite the fact that Kant rejected the idea of the mutability of species and was a pre-Darwinian critic of evolutionary thinking. But Kant did have a concept of deep geological time. He thought and explored in such works as the early Universal Natural History and Theory of the Heavens, but also the late Critique of the Power of Judgment, that the cosmos and the planet Earth within it had existed for millions of years, which at the time was a huge break from the view that had been dominant in European natural philosophy in the centuries before, where the age of the Earth was calculated in thousands of years. He also thought that, while no new species of living beings had been introduced along the way, and so were ostensibly all present in some form from the beginning, terrestrial life had undergone dramatic transformations over the history of the Earth. One such transformation within Earth's history, perhaps the most important transformation of all in Kant's view, was the transformation of human beings from a species that possesses reason as a seed or a chyma, that is, as something dormant and lying in wait, to a species that possesses reason as a self-actualizing, self-developing, self-enacting part of itself. Humans are rational beings. This is one of the two fundamental posits of Kant's philosophy when it comes to the nature of human beings. The second, that humans were not always as rational as they are today. Though even the earliest humanoids had reason as something implanted in them, only at a certain precise point did the seed of reason open up and release a sprout of reason, which became a bush of reason, and finally a tree or a beanstalk of reason. The earliest humans were, we might say, proto-rational, while more recent humans are rational, or are at the least capable of following reason's dictates, and so, paradoxically perhaps, of acting freely on their own accord. We can easily translate Kant's positing of early proto-rational Homo sapiens to our more modern positing of early proto-rational hominins. In a way, the specific details of the story we tell about this proto-rational past, such as exactly what these proto-rational creatures looked like, how many of them there were, and how widely spaced they are from us in our time, matters less for both Kant and us than does the fact that they lack reason, or at best have it in potentia, while we have it. They are not able to take their fate into their own hands. We are. They are not truly responsible for their actions. We are. Back to the hominin ancestor infanticide thought experiment, which we have used in hopes of making all of this explicit in an expedient way. Almost certainly, the line between technical and practical responsibility will have been crossed prior to the emergence of Homo sapiens sapiens about 300,000 years ago, either with a direct ancestor of Homo sapiens or with one of the innumerable cousins who are related to Homo sapiens, but not direct evolutionary antecedents. Maybe it was crossed with Homo habilis, the OG tool-using, handy, dexterous hominin. For they who can use a tool can also use a weapon, am I right? Or maybe it was with Homo erectus, whose very name reflects a certain associatively rational appreciation. For standing erect is part of what it means to act rationally, to be, as it were, a freestanding, upstanding human citizen, someone who can stand on their own 2 feet, and who stands ready to stand up for what they stand for. To be admitted into the club of rational beings would be a big step for any of our hominin ancestors or cousins to make. For to tread here is to set foot in the space of reasons, a concept introduced by the mid-century American philosopher Wilfrid Sellars precisely in order to carve out a space for what I call extranatural reason amidst an otherwise totalizing nature. The space of reasons is a space where rational agents converge, mutually generate one another, and interact. It is a space where rational agents justify themselves and their actions to themselves and to other rational beings. It is a space with a big hand-painted wooden sign hanging above the doorway leading in that says, "Abandon all proto-rationality, ye who enter here." Sellars' vision involves the holding together of 2 images. In the first image, what Sellars calls the scientific image is undisputed when it comes to everything having to do with what the world is. In the second image, the manifest image, non-naturalistic or paranaturalistic explanations hold sway, for this is the image of how the world should be and corresponds to what some might call society or civilization, or, in more theoretical jargon, the space of normativity, the space of action, the space of reasons. The Sellarsian space of reasons, like its more Habermasian Frankfurt School variation, which speaks in terms of justifications and normative orders, or in its more Rawlsian Harvard-Chicago variation, which speaks in terms of normativity and principles, promises something uniquely attractive to the neo-Kantian rationalist. It promises the ability to wipe their hands of certain complicated features of previous, less refined accounts of extranatural reason, such as Descartes' dualistic notion of non-extended mental substance, or Kant's own parametaphysical notion of reason as a transcendental faculty of cognition, while still being able to reap the morality evidencing, society upholding, normativity instantiating rewards of the concept of extranatural reason itself. The Sellarsian space of reasons is a way, one way, by no means the only way, of keeping alive the dream of human responsibility in an age where, absent some extranatural intervention, the world is generally taken to be what it is, and where what it is generally taken to have nothing to do with what we think it should be. Modern Sellarsian Kantians, which I suppose I am at least in part myself, have something powerful to say about human nature, human action, and human responsibility. But in order to say it, they need the listener to accept the existence, even if only the nominal existence, which is to say, called into existence within our conventions of naming and conversation and language, the existence of an extranatural something that, despite being extranatural, a matter of should, not is, nonetheless emerged at some definite point in the archaic history of hominin evolution. Without the conceit of this something, the whole house of cards tumbles down, and we can no longer hold ourselves, even the sanest, most free, and most adult among us, practically responsible for infanticide, or any other side for that matter. This something is made to seem so small, so qualified, and so buttressed against objection, so minuscule and insubstantial, so non-controversial and non-threatening that it is hoped the natural scientific eye might not notice it at all. In this way, the notion of human rational and moral responsibility slips through. And because of the success of this slipping through, many today find in human reason the very meaning of human life. If you simultaneously hold that human beings are, at least in some cases, some of the time, responsible for their actions, and that no other animal alive today can be, even some of the time, responsible for their actions, then you have to explain how humans got to be this way. Many possible explanations have been tried. Assuming you accept the idea that human beings are the last extant species of hominins, but that the earth has seen innumerable other hominins who are ancestors or cousins of ours, your explanation must accommodate questions related to the pre- and post-infanticidal hominin. Chief among them, where and when do you draw the line, and what is it exactly that separates us from them. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you liked this little dive into the On the Conthropocene project. It's been a lot of fun sharing this work with you. Let me know what you think in the comments. I also have a quick announcement for those listening or watching in Germany, especially in the Stuttgart region. On Friday, the 8th of August, so that's probably next Friday if you're listening to this beforehand, that evening at 6 p.m., that's 18 Uhr, I'll be recording a live episode of this podcast with the Munich-based philosopher Tatjana Schoenwalder-Kuntz. The recording will be in German, and we'll be discussing beauty, nature, the history of art, sculpture, relationship between philosophy, culture, society, religion. We're going to cover a lot of ground inspired by the statues and other artwork and ambiance at the Stuttgart Lapidarium, where the event is held. So that's the Lapidarium, which is part of the museum family. Beautiful setting. The weather should be good. So if you're, and it's free of charge as well. So if you're in the region, come out and check us out, especially if you speak German. Otherwise, that episode will be released in the future and you can catch it then. So thanks, everybody. Hope you're all well. Have a good day. Yada, yada, yada. See you next time. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Have a great summer. Bye. The Deadbeat Philosophy Podcast is a co-production of Deadbeat Media and the Museum Hegelhaus Stuttgart. For more Deadbeat content and to chip in to keep the channel going, check us out at deadbeatphilosophy.substack.com. For more about the Museum Hegelhaus, check out hegelhaus.de. That's HEGEL-HAUS.de. Adios and auf Wiedersehen.